Hey, Brooke here. What happens to a generation when no one is really watching? Today, we're talking about Generation X, the most unsupervised generation. The so-called latchkey kids who grew up feral, skeptical, and mildly allergic to corporate enthusiasm. If you've ever met someone who can fix a sink, distrust authority, survive on coffee, and emotionally shut down in under 3 seconds, they're not only probably a Gen X, but there's also a reason. Generation X, roughly born between 1965 and 1980, grew up in a very specific psychological environment. Rising divorce rates, 2 working parents, less supervision, no smartphones, no location tracking, no text me when you get there. This created what psychologists would call early independence, but not the curated Montessori version. More like, here's a microwave and a TV dinner, don't burn the house down. And when children are given responsibility early, they develop high self-efficacy, a term coined by psychologist Albert Bandura. Self-efficacy is your belief that you can handle things. Gen X didn't just believe they could handle things, they had to, which is why many Gen X adults today default to, I'll just do it myself. Not because they're control freaks, but because historically, waiting for help was inefficient. Gen X is famously cynical. They side-eye marketing. They distrust institutions. They survived corporate downsizing in the 90s. They watched pensions evaporate. They saw authority figures fall. Watergate. Corporate scandals. If you grow up watching trusted systems collapse, your brain adapts. This is where attachment theory quietly comes in. Originally developed by John Bowlby, attachment isn't just about parents, it's about predictability and safety in your environment. If systems feel unstable, you'll develop what I'll call institutional avoidant attachment. You don't fully trust authority. You don't assume stability. You keep emotional distance from the hype. Which explains why Gen X branding always feels like, yeah, whatever, not apathy, defense. Honestly, if society collapses tomorrow, I'm following someone from Gen X because they know how to use a map, change a tire, entertain themselves without Wi-Fi. This is what psychologists call stress inoculation. Small, repeated exposures to stress builds resilience. Gen X had low-grade environmental stress constantly. Their nervous systems adapted to tolerate ambiguity. You know how some people panic when plans change? Well, Gen X grew up without plans, which means uncertainty feels normal. Now let's talk humor. Gen X humor is dry, sarcastic, slightly dark, and it's not random. Humor is a coping mechanism. When psychologists study defense mechanisms, humor is one of the mature ones. It allows distance from stress without denying reality. And when you grow up navigating ambiguity and independence, you develop irony. Now here's where it gets interesting. Psychologist D.W. Winnicott talked about the false self, the version of you that adapts to external expectations. Gen X didn't necessarily develop a false self, but they did develop a functional self, a version of themselves optimized for resilience. They learned, don't be dramatic, don't expect rescue, and figure it out. Gen X did not grow up in the let's process our feelings era. They grew up in the walk it off era. So many Gen X adults developed emotional self-containment, and that creates competence, but it can also create difficulty asking for help when you're struggling. Independence is powerful, but extreme self-reliance can make vulnerability uncomfortable. If your childhood lesson was no one's coming, that made your baseline belief be I'll handle it, which is admirable, but heavy. Gen X isn't apathetic. They're calibrated. They learned early that stability is fragile, so they built internal stability instead. They're skeptical but competent, private but loyal, low drama but deeply resilient. They're pioneers of solitude. And maybe the most Gen X trait of all, they don't need a headline about it. They're fine just existing, handling it quietly. So if you're Gen X and you're wondering why you're always the calm in the chaos, or why you instinctively double check everything, it's because your generation is super adaptable. Your competence and resilience knows no bounds. Just don't forget to cry or ask for help occasionally, okay? I promise I won't tell anybody. Anyway, that's what your mixtape making, drink from the hose brain just learned. If you want more, please subscribe. Or don't. I'm not your boss.